Okay, did it transition to full screen? Okay, excellent. So, as promised, this is going to be a presentation on the rules of procedure that we use at National Model United Nations. It's going to cover not only the rules of procedure, but also some expectations about delegate behavior and how to accurately represent your member state in a diplomatic setting. It's also going to go over some details, including AI use at the conference, which is a new and emerging I won't say complication, but it's an issue that we as a conference have to work with you as delegates to figure out how best to use this tool we now have. So we'll be discussing AI use at the conference and then kind of going over a general run through of what your week in New York will look like and how to use our rules of procedure that we have here at NMUN to your advantage. So, again, agenda, we'll start off by talking about the general philosophy behind our rules of procedure, how we try to teach multilateral diplomacy and use that as a tool for you as students to learn about the world around you, learn global citizenship, and how our rules of procedure help make that a possibility. Then we'll transition over to, again, as promised, a discussion on AI use at the conference. And then we'll get right into the rules of procedure. We're going to be covering what motions you can use at NMUN. We're going to discuss what those motions are used for and how to use them properly. And then we'll do a run through of the general committee flow so you have an idea of what to expect if this is your first time at an NMUN conference, especially NMUN New York. We may have some of you here who have attended other conferences, either one of the internationals or perhaps NMUN DC. And while they use the same rules of procedure, those are shorter conferences and kind of have a different vibe as a result, whereas New York is a full 4-day conference experience. And so we want to give you an idea of what to expect if this is your first time in New York. And then as promised at the end, we will have a general Q&A session where you can ask any questions you have, even if it's not related necessarily to something we discussed during the presentation. Okay, so getting right into it. Again, we have developed a unique rules of procedure for NMUN. Some of you may have attended other Model UN conferences. They use different rules, but we have developed ours in order to, in our opinion, best illustrate the educational mission of the conference while being a simulation of the real United Nations. At the real UN, the entire entity is founded on the notion of member state sovereignty. The idea is that all nations of the world have sovereignty and therefore run their countries as they see fit. And this is just a body where they can come together to try and address issues while maintaining that sovereignty over their own borders. So the UN serves as a facilitation for meaningful debate and decision making at the international level, global governance. So this is real countries determining real world outcomes for the future of their citizens, but also the world at large. Here at NMUN, we are, of course, thankfully not tasked with solving all of the world's issues in real life, but we are tasked with trying to emulate that experience so that you, as young adults, have the ability to think about solutions to the world's issues. So we have to try and find a balance of realism of the simulation of the real UN, which is why we structure our conference in the way we do, with the committees that we simulate every year and the membership of those committees reflecting the real UN. We have some loose interpretations of that simulation as well to facilitate the educational experience that we want you all to get. So we've made some adaptations to the way that the UN operates in order to do so. So that means that that interpretation of where we try to simulate accurately versus where we mess with the system so that you can have a good educational experience is up to the discretion of our NMUN staff, our secretariat, who are the ones who are directors and assistant directors in your committees, our undersecretary generals for each department who will be floating around in your committee rooms, and all the way up to Courtney and I as the deputy and secretary general for the conference. So we try to make sure that we are emulating the real world UN while giving you the experience to not be confined to the harsh realities of the real world, which can be a very complicated place for diplomacy, as many of you may be noticing right about now. So that's the sort of philosophy in terms of how we came to our rules of procedure. Now, many of you might have come across other conferences that use almost directly or somewhat directly Robert's Rules of Order, a very old parliamentary procedure format. We do not use this at National Model United Nations. So that means that there are no points of information or points of personal privileges, things that you may have experienced at other Model UN conferences. The real United Nations doesn't function in the same way as a parliament would. And so that's why we've adopted a rules of procedure that more accurately reflects that of the real UN, as opposed to Robert's Rules of Order. And we'll talk more about some of those commonly misused motions that apply in Robert's rules, but not NMUN procedure. So again, we are figuring out how to promote the educational mission of National Model United Nations while having a somewhat accurate simulation of the real UN. But our ultimate goal is to not have a perfect simulation, but rather use this simulation to promote experiential learning. What are you meant to learn at Model United Nations? Well, in our opinion, we think that we can use this simulation to teach the value of multilateral diplomacy and cooperation. You will be working with other delegates representing different member states who have different goals. And in order to achieve common goals that help everyone while maintaining the needs of your member state's position, you will have to negotiate. You will have to engage with people who have differing views and differing foreign policy stances. And that's the whole goal of this exercise, is encouraging you to learn how that process can be achieved. So multilateral diplomacy and cooperation is a major goal. We also are promoting hard skills like public speaking and negotiation. In your committees, you will hopefully all have at least one opportunity. If you're in a plenary sized committee, sometimes it can be very difficult to speak more than once, but we hope that everyone will have an opportunity to give a speech to a room full of your fellow delegates that you will have prepared in terms of what you want to say. And then once you break into informal session, you will be negotiating with your fellow delegates and trying to push your member state's position. These are all skills that we hope you develop as a part of this academic exercise. We also are promoting the idea of global citizenship. More and more, as you look at the world around you, you may feel like we need more people to step up and try to help the world as a whole, as opposed to individual needs of a country or a region, or in some cases, one person. And our simulation promotes the idea of you as a global citizen, taking charge of leadership at the personal, at the local, national, and of course, international level. And lastly, the way we achieve this is by having you engage in both research and writing. Again, some hard skills you can develop through National Model United Nations. You all have submitted your wonderful position papers, which we are currently evaluating right now. Our secretariat are reading those papers and evaluating them based on our criteria. And we love to see that going into the conference, knowing that you have put in the work to research your member state's position. And then when you get to the conference, of course, you will be writing these wonderful working papers where you are expressing in writing as a group the desire of all member states in that group and how they look to address the topics we've provided for your committees. So you're translating the research you've done into a written output, these working papers that will become draft resolutions and then will be voted upon in your committees. So at the end of the day, we're trying to promote these skills through this simulation, which sometimes means that we are not accurately simulating things the way it happens at the real UN, but that's a good thing because the real UN sometimes doesn't work the way we want it to. We give you the opportunity to actually address these issues in our simulation. So that means you have to put on your diplomat hats. That means that you all as delegates have to think like a diplomat and act like a diplomat representing the member state you've been assigned. So what does that mean? Well, to be a diplomat, you need to know the foreign policy of your member state by heart. Your entire job for real world diplomats is to know the position that is going to best benefit and serve the member state you represent. And your entire job is to advocate for that in any setting, whether that's at the UN or working ambassadors working directly with bilateral diplomacy with other nations. You have to know your policy by heart. That is why we ask you to produce those position papers. So that way we know that you've at least done some research in terms of what your member state wants to do about these topics. Now, An important thing to note here is that diplomats do not always behave like the leaders of their country. We usually see national leaders in public media, and we hear their speeches and their foreign policy stance. But diplomats usually work under a different set of rules because diplomats don't just get to have hardline policies and ignore the rest. They have to work within this international community to get anything done. So you may hear a speech from the leader of your member state that you're representing that has a hardline policy stance. But if you look at the actual actions of diplomats within the United Nations or other international systems, they don't always have the same rhetoric as leaders do. Diplomats want to be involved in conversations. That is the entire point of diplomacy, is to discuss how to address things, discuss how to implement your member state's goals. And if you don't interact with other people, you can't make that a reality. And so part of our simulation is we encourage more collaboration and discussion, even in situations where in the real world we know hostilities between member states can sometimes contribute to member states not working with each other outwardly or publicly. But the goal of a diplomat is always to try and get people on your side. That means compromise, and compromise can be an incredibly difficult task. But it is the essence of a diplomat's work, is finding ways to get other diplomats representing other countries on board with what is best going to benefit your member state. And so that's what we hope you all will have in the back of your mind when you approach the simulation in New York in just a few weeks. Finding compromise, finding ways to get other member states on board with your member states' goals. That is what we want you to practice doing at the conference. Okay, so question we get a lot, especially at conference, is delegations who have selected or have been given member states with more aggressive hardline policy stances, member states who are actively at war or in conflict with other member states in the region, and therefore it can be difficult. We always get questions about, well, how do I represent this more difficult type of member state while still being diplomatic, while still being collaborative? Because I do want to accurately be a representative of this country, but sometimes that can be difficult. And to answer that question, first and foremost, you will need to know your position well. As we mentioned, that is the bread and butter of a diplomat. If you know your position well, you can best advocate how to get other people to either agree with or at least tolerate some of the more difficult policy stances that your member state has, but you can get others to compromise and meet you halfway. Again, the essence of a diplomat is compromise. So your job is to figure out how you can find compromises that don't undermine the goals of your member state at the end of the day. It can be challenging, but it is certainly possible. So if you know your position well and you know what things your member state wouldn't want to give up at the end of the day versus what your member state would be willing to give up in a compromise in order to get what it really wants, that can help you engage with your fellow delegations, even when your member state has particularly unpopular or hardline foreign policy stances. We see this oftentimes with, again, member states that are actively in conflict. For instance, Russia, Ukraine, or Israel. We see delegates not quite sure how to promote their member state's foreign policy. But if you truly know the member state's position and you know what that member state would be willing to give up, you can find compromise at an NMUN conference. Another question we frequently get is, well, what happens if other delegates don't want to work with me just because of the country that I'm representing? Unfortunately, we see this as an issue as well at the conference, as again, some delegates think this is a one-to-one simulation of the real UN, and there are instances where real-world diplomacy shuts down entirely due to things like open conflict and war. But our goal, again, with the educational mission of National Model United Nations is to encourage collaboration, even in situations where that would be difficult given real-world circumstances. So if you have that situation, if you find that you are getting delegates who are saying, well, my country doesn't want to work with yours because of X, Y, Z, we would encourage you to simply focus on your member state's priority. We don't want any delegation to feel pressured to have to go against what they believe is their member state's foreign policy directives in order to work with a group. Focus on your state's priorities and try to find those who will work with you to move forward with your member state's goals. There will always be delegations that will be willing to work with you. Sometimes it can be difficult. There might be a situation where a member state that might be critical to a certain initiative you want to push forward is not willing to negotiate with you. But you can always try to find help and common goals elsewhere. So if you focus on your member state's priorities and you seek support from those delegations that do align with your policy, you will still be able to have the collaborative educational experience that we are hoping for. Courtney, do we have anything in the chat?
Yes, we do. How do we deal with a lack of diplomacy from fellow delegates? Specifically, examples like disrespect, maybe certain behaviors, things like that.
Yeah, great question, right? Sometimes, again, in an effort to be what delegates may believe to be accurate to real world diplomacy, we see behavior that is truly undiplomatic in nature from delegates because they think that that's how the real world member state would act. Despite the fact that that's not obviously true in most cases, we do still see it. And if you come across this kind of behavior where you have a delegation who is not acting diplomacy or diplomatically, who is not willing to work with you, or who is acting in a very unprofessional or disrespectful manner, there's a few ways you can address this. First and foremost, I always tell delegates to lead by example. In the face of unprofessional behavior, the best way to shut down that type of behavior is to respond with professionalism. Respond the way that you, as a diplomat, would respond in the face of that kind of behavior. And that usually shuts down that type of behavior, especially when it's in a group of delegates who all are under the similar mind of trying to be professional and remain in the character of a real world diplomat. When one person is the odd man out and acting out of character and unprofessionally, if everyone else is not following that example, it usually shuts down that kind of behavior. Beyond that, if the behavior were to persist and it breaks any of our NMUN code of conduct rules in terms of behavior from delegates, then that would be a situation where you can seek assistance from the secretariat. Um, if it's a especially egregious instance, like some form of harassment or bullying, you can bring that up to the secretariat and we will help address that issue. You can also, of course, reach out to the support systems that you should have built into your delegation. So, that being things like a head delegate who can maybe come in and walk you through how to approach that situation, or perhaps your faculty advisors if we need to get advisors brought in on a situation if it's particularly egregious. At the end of the day, though, if you remain professional and you maintain diplomatic behavior, you can overcome just about any undiplomatic behavior. Hopefully, that provides some guidance on that. But of course, we can also discuss that further if you have any other questions. Was there anything else, Courtney? Nope. Okay.
I'm muted again. No,
So,
no, it's not.
moving on then. So now we will transition over to AI use. So this is something we've been kind of dealing with for the past couple of years with the launch of ChatGPT in 2022, I believe it was. It's really kind of changed the game in terms of how quickly we can get work done using these tools. AI has emerged as a truly valuable tool for students like yourselves as you're navigating research, writing, and creative ideas that you want to interpret for this conference experience. And that's great. We see the value in AI in terms of lessening the workload for students who are already overburdened in their college experience. I am a history professor, so trust me, I know entirely the burdens that students like you are under in the undergraduate or graduate settings. But that being said, the misuse of AI can also work to diminish the educational experience of students, especially in the context of Model UN. A big part of our learning is that experiential learning that we talked about with the practice of engaging in diplomacy, the practice of public speaking and negotiating. And the use of AI stands to diminish that experiential learning. So the question really becomes, Where does generative AI fit within the NMUN delegate experience? Now, some of you in your position paper writing will have noted this year we had a new policy where we asked all delegations to disclose whether they used AI in the writing of their position paper, whatever degree they used it. All we ask is that you disclose. We are not evaluating those papers any differently based on the use of AI because we recognize that all students have access to and may need to use AI. But disclosing whether you have or not is a norm within academia, and it's one that we look to incorporate from here on out. So you can imagine that our ACT conference policy is also going to reflect that reality. We know that AI is there for delegates to use to make a positive impact on their experience. And we just want to help frame how we, as facilitators of this educational experience, want you to utilize AI. So, what you see on the right, asking ChatGPT to just write you an entire working paper, obviously not what we want. So, what do we want to see ChatGPT or any other AI being used to do? And the answer for that is we want you to use it as a tool. What it is intended to be, a tool to help work get done as opposed to a replacement. Um, Using AI to collect research, compile useful data that is relevant to your committee or your working groups, and of course, adjusting language in your working papers can help you as delegates produce higher quality output than you could given a 4-day conference. For those of you who maybe have done NMUN before, you know that it is a whirlwind experience and you've only got so many hours to get this work done. AI can help reduce that workload and help you get more done with such a limited window. And we want you as delegates to embrace that. Any way that AI can help you not spend hours doing searches looking for information or not be agonizing over the language you're using for a clause. That's what we hope to see you use AI to do. So that being said, the main thing we want to encourage you to do is when at the conference, no matter where information is coming from, whether you just wrote a clause off the top of your head or you use ChatGPT to write a clause for you, that all needs to be discussed within your working groups. This is the essence of the experience of being a delegate at National Model United Nations is whatever you are contributing, it is going to be discussed as a group with your fellow delegates. So if you use ChatGPT to put together a bare bones operative clause and you would like to have that put into the working paper that you're on, that's fine to do so, but it needs to be an experience where when you are proposing this to be added to the paper, you are discussing it with your fellow delegates, just like you would if you were typing it on a document manually, right? The idea is that we still want that collaborative experience to be in place, even if we're using AI as a tool to help produce that material in a much faster manner. Okay. This follows the same logic that we have had in place for years about pre-written resolutions. It has always been a rule, as far as I can remember with NMUN, that we don't allow delegates to come in with, say, a pre-written working paper that they just present to a working group and say, "Do you guys agree with this?" And they submit it to the dais. Pre-written resolutions are not collaborative in nature. They do not represent the spirit of diplomacy. And using AI in that same way would also defeat that purpose. So this is our request that we are making sure that we are discussing as a working group anything that's being contributed, whether it's AI or otherwise written. And this helps ensure that we have that educational experience. So just to run through a couple, I guess, more scenario-based situations, we have some examples of what you can and should use AI to do versus what we would discourage you from using AI to do in a committee setting. So first and foremost, helping conduct research. It's one of the greatest capabilities of ChatGPT is to filter through, millions of megabytes of data and compile for you what information is relevant based on the prompt you've put in. So we would love to see delegates using AI to help conduct quick and effective research on the topics that they're discussing in their working groups. The counter to that is we do not want to see delegates using AI to directly implement dais feedback on a working paper. So some of you, if this is your first conference, We go through rounds of edits with the material you submit in committee. You will submit a working paper to the dais, they will review it, and they will give you the document back with feedback, asking you to expand upon certain ideas, to rethink some of the positions in there to make it flow a little bit better. So you'll have a document with a lot of comments asking you to improve the paper. While AI is great for conducting research and gathering information, we don't want you to simply put in, please rewrite my paper to address the feedback we have received. Because generative AI and large language models are not going to be able to accurately interpret what your directors and assistant directors have told you on these papers. So it's not going to produce the type of improvements on the document that we would like to see. So conducting research, if a director leaves a comment saying, "Hey, is this being done already anywhere within the United Nations systems? And if so, how can we maybe look to improve existing measures as opposed to calling for something new?" Um, AI is a great tool to find out where this is already being done within the UN system. But if you were to try and use AI to just rewrite your clauses or your paper to better reflect that, it's probably going to produce subpar work. And so this is one thing we would discourage you from doing. Another positive is to improve language and clarity. We very much recognize that many of our delegates are not native English speakers, but English is the working language of the conference. And so sometimes the work that is being written in working papers may have language that is difficult to understand in the English context. AI is a great tool to improve the language and clarity of a clause, if, especially if you're working with a group of people for whom native or English is not the native language. One thing we would not like to see is AI used to just outright rewrite clauses that other delegations have written. We see this often if the dais were to leave a comment on a clause saying, "I'm not sure what you mean by this. Would you mind, clarifying what the purpose of this operative is?" We would not want to see a delegate in that group simply putting that clause into ChatGPT and producing a rewritten version that they then copy and paste over the original. That defeats the collaborative nature of the experience. Now, if this is the clause you've written and you would like to use AI to assist in rewriting it for clarity, that's great. But again, whatever is resubmitted would need to be discussed as a group for that working paper. Lastly, gathering relevant information. Again, one of the greatest strengths of AI is the ability to compile relevant information in a relatively short order, whether that's just gathering data that you would like to include in preambular clauses, or perhaps finding all relevant stakeholders in a current topic and making sure to include their role in an operative clause. That's great. And we would love to see that. That way we produce more thorough and effective uh, working papers and eventually draft resolutions. What we do not want to see is delegates using AI to formulate their member state position, right? If the dais gives feedback on saying, well, some member states may not want to work with this particular operative because of X, Y, Z. What we wouldn't want to do is for delegates to formulate their position on a topic by putting it into Chat GPT. Again, large language models are not great at interpreting real world, especially diplomatic positions. They're just gathering data and compiling what seems to be the most appropriate response. This is where we would hope you have done your research. And again, as a diplomat, you would know your member state's position well and wouldn't rely on AI to cover this. Okay. So these are just a few examples. I see we've had some things in the chat. Courtney, do we have any further questions that I can provide clarification on?
Nope, it was just a question about the disclosure statement on the position paper that I answered.
Cool. Okay. So again, we want to encourage delegates to use AI, especially if you are particularly savvy with how to use prompts to produce quality output in terms of research. We want to see delegates using this wonderful tool that we have. But in terms of how that can impede upon the educational experience at NMUN, we really want to make sure that we are encouraging you all to uh, do it the old school way in terms of the collaborative nature of working with one another for this 4-day whirlwind conference in New York City. Okay, so now that we've gotten through that, we will now go into the committee flow. So again, we want to give you a picture of what to expect over the course of the week. So we're just going to do a walkthrough of what committee will look like at a broad level. Okay. So the first night of conference after the opening ceremonies, you will have one session that evening. And that will include a welcome and introduction from your dais. That means your director and your assistant director in committee, or if you're in a D only, you will only have a director. So they'll introduce themselves and give you some ground rules for the week. And then they will move on to roll call. Once they take on that first night, they will do a formal roll call where they allow you to stand up and indicate whether your member state is present or present and voting. And then we will go into formal session, which will include giving formal speeches on setting the agenda. You all know that your committees have two topics. So that first session will be dedicated to picking which of the two topics you all would like to address in committee. So you'll be discussing informal speeches and an informal session with your fellow delegates which topic you should discuss for the week. Okay. That means there will be a speakers list open. You will be able to add your name. And if you are on the list, you will give a speech on which topic you would like to discuss. You'll go into and out of formal debate using a motion to suspend the meeting. And once consensus is reached, once enough member states feel like they know which topic most member states want to discuss, we will then be moving into the time where a motion to set the agenda will be put forward. Okay. Um, when the motion to set the agenda is put forward, as long as it passes, then we will automatically adopt that topic that was proposed, and the conversation will then transition to that. If for some reason, um, by the end of that first session, uh, a motion to set the agenda does not pass. We have not gotten a motion that will choose either topic order one, then two, or two, then one. It will automatically be set to the way it's listed in the background guide because we don't want to spend more time than necessary trying to pick the agenda. We need to actually get into these topics. So if at the end of that first session we don't have a motion passed to adopt the order, it will just be set as listed in one, then two. And then we move on to debate on that topic, which means a new speakers list will open. This is important. We often get new delegates who are confused by this. Once a motion to set the agenda has been accepted, we open a brand new speakers list. That old list will be deleted, and you will be asked again to add your member state's name to the list to be able to speak on the topic that we are now discussing. Okay? And from there, we enter back into this sort of teeter-totter between formal session, where you'll be giving speeches, and informal debate, where you will have a suspension of the meeting, where you can go around and speak with your fellow delegates, begin working groups, and start writing working papers. Most of the conference is spent switching in between formal session, so hearing speeches, and breaking into informal session to get your work done. This is the sort of regular flow of most of the conference, beginning with that second day's session. Okay. That will go on. You will write working papers. You will submit those working papers to the dais. You will rewrite them, implementing that feedback. And eventually, towards the end of the week, we will get to a point where we either exhaust the speakers list, so everyone who was on the list has spoken and no one else has added their name, or more likely, we see a motion to close debate, which will then allow us to go into voting procedure. So any of the working papers that have been discussed in committee and accepted by the dais as draft resolutions will then be voted upon by the body. After voting procedure, if time allows in your committee, if you've still got committee time left, you will then move directly into the second topic. And we start from the beginning. A new speakers list will be opened, and you will use the rest of the remaining time of conference to discuss that topic. In rare cases, we've seen a second topic be completed. This usually happens in the smaller committees where they get through the first topic within the first, 5 or 6 committee sessions. But it's not an expectation. We just want to use all the time that you have for the conference to be doing this exercise. So you'll get through as much as you can for the second topic. Maybe get to voting procedure, maybe not. That's okay. At the end of that experience, when it's just about time for the last session to start wrapping up, we will call for a final motion for the year, which is a motion to adjourn the meeting, which will be ending your committee session until NMUN 2027 next year. Okay, so that's the general flow for the entirety of the week. Courtney, do we have anything in the chat? Nope. Okay. Cool. So during those sessions, again, mostly alternating in between formal session and informal suspensions of the meeting, you will be using these motions to facilitate what you're doing with that time. Okay, this is the entire list of the motions that are available for you as delegates to use at the conference. There's not very many of them, so we would encourage you to review these. This is available on the last page of the NMUN short or long form rules, which will have a QR code to during this presentation. But these are all of the motions that delegates can use, and we'll talk about a few of them in particular here. Um, the ones that you can see highlighted here are the core motions that we see most often at NMUN. Most common is suspension of the meeting. This is how we move from formal session, where delegates are using the time to do formal speeches, into those working periods where you work with your working groups, you debate with other member states in a more informal session. This is a very simple motion. You would just raise your placard, and if called upon, you would say, "Thank you, Honorable Chair. Thank you, fellow delegates. Kyrgyzstan moves to suspend the meeting for 20 minutes." And then the body will vote on whether they would like to suspend the meeting for 20 minutes. Very simple motion, but it is the most common one you will see. So become very familiar with that. Again, we mentioned adjournment of the meeting. This is raised one time at the very end of the week to end your committee session until next year. Also, simple motion requires no speakers, just a simple majority. Okay. Closure of debate. As we mentioned, that's one of the ways that your committee will move into voting procedure on the topics and the draft resolutions for your committee. So this one will likely happen. Exhausting the speakers list usually doesn't work, so we use closure of debate. When you are in voting, there is one particular motion that is we see commonly used, known as division of the proposal. This is only available during voting procedure, and this is a way for you to highlight a particularly important operative or set of operatives within a document. It's a two-part, somewhat complex motion that we'll cover more a little bit later. But the idea here is you separate out one portion of a draft resolution and vote on that act. And then if that passes, you would then vote on whether to annex that portion of the document or delete it entirely. So this again only can happen during voting procedure. The ones down towards the bottom, you'll see setting the speaker's time. This is something we do allow you as delegates to do if you feel that there's too much time being given to speakers, or perhaps there's too little time and we need more time to discuss in a formal setting. After the first night, we don't allow this on the first session during setting the agenda, but beginning with the second day of conference, you can go and speak to your dais during an informal session and say, we would like to either increase or decrease the amount of time. And they will give you the go ahead if they believe that it's relevant. And then that motion will allow you to either add or subtract time from each speaker during formal session. You can also close the speakers list, which is a motion that is essential if you do want to use that as a way to get into voting procedure. You can just make it so no one else can add their names to the speakers list, and then hopefully it would run out, which would then move you into voting procedure. So there's a motion for that. Adoption of the agenda at the very bottom. Again, we discussed this is how you will select which of the two topics you would like to discuss first in your committee. So that will be used on the first night. Very simple motion. Just say we would like to adopt the agenda in the order of 1-2 or 2-1, and then you put it to a vote, and hopefully the body has consensus over this. Courtney, anything in the chat?
Yes, we have one good question. Does the term formal debate refer to the speeches delivered during formal sessions, or are there also moderated caucuses in this conference?
Great question. So at NMUN, when we say formal debate, we are referring, in fact, to those speeches delivered to the entire body during formal session. At NMUN, we do not have any sort of moderated caucuses. The formal debate is the only moderated caucus where each member state, based on the speakers list, is allowed to speak. Once we break into informal session, via suspension of the meeting, there is no moderated caucus where the dais or anyone on our secretariat will be leading a discussion. That is up to you as delegates. If you would like to create some form of moderated caucus amongst yourselves, you're more than welcome to. But we prefer a more free-form approach. We just call it informal session, and delegates are encouraged to use that time as they best see fit to negotiate their positions and get working papers done. So there is no moderated caucus at National Model United Nations. So great question. Is there anything else? Sorry, you're muted, Courtney.
Oh,
All good?
all the time. Nope, I do not see anything else.
Okay. All right. So again, the ones you see highlighted here are the most important. I'll briefly touch on the rest of these. A point of
Oh,
order and appeal. Sorry, go ahead.
we have one more question about this
Sure.
before you. What would be an example of how we propose a moderated caucus for a speaking time?
So proposing a moderated caucus for a speaking time. I'm not quite sure. Can you
I'm
elaborate on
wondering
that?
if, yeah, I'm wondering if it's about, trying to do a moderated caucus. And um, so I think the question really is, how would we propose doing a moderated caucus, which really is up to, to talk about a specific topic for a specific amount of time. So, like, really get into the moderated part. I think we really don't make those proposals since we do not explicitly require moderated caucuses. It is really up to you as delegates for when you're in your working groups to determine if you'd like to do more of a strict timekeeping moderated caucus, or if you're going to do more of an informal caucus. I'd say you'd have to see how the week goes, and also always remember that it doesn't have to be that rigid to have these discussions, but you're welcome to use it. So.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. If you within your working group, let's say you've got a group of 15 delegates that you're working with on a working group. If you all really want to hammer out a very specific topic in your working paper and you feel that a moderated setting is going to be more efficient, you all as 15 member states can agree to sit in a circle and we're all going to have 1 minute to discuss it. You have 1 minute to put forward your idea for how we can amend this working paper. That sort of
Yep.
thing where everyone agrees to that structure is perfect and you are able to do that however that group agrees is perfectly fine. We just don't facilitate that from our end. We want you all to choose how to best use your time during informal session. But during our formal session, we will be speaking on whatever your member state would like to use your 60 or 90 seconds to speak on. That is yours to use however you see fit.
Great. And then one more question. Um, is point of inquiry not used since this is not a teaching conference?
Correct. And again, some other rules of procedure at different conferences or certain interpretations of Robert's Rules of Orders allow for this, but we do not have a point of inquiry or a point of personal privilege. If you do have a question, instead of raising a motion for it, we encourage all delegates to simply go up to the dais during the next informal session, which will be within 10 minutes of any question you might have, and just ask them directly. Our dais love to have delegates come up and ask questions during informal session. That's one of the main priorities they have. So if you have a question, feel free to just go up and ask the dais during the next informal session, and they would be more than happy to clarify that for you. Okay.
That is our
So
final last question right now.
cool. So again, I'll run through these other motions real quick. Most of them are just related to these more important ones, but we do have a point of order, which is if you believe that the dais has made a procedural error, like we were supposed to be in suspension of the meeting for 30 minutes, but you called us back in 20 minutes. You could raise that as a point of order, or if there's a motion for an adjournment of debate, and you didn't ask for two speakers in favor or two speakers against. That is a procedural error, and so you would raise a point of order. So basically, if you believe that the dais has not followed one of these motions appropriately that you see on the screen here, that's where you would raise a point of order to correct that. And an appeal of the chair is just a follow up to that. If you raise a point of order and the dais says, no, that was not an error in procedure, you can then raise an appeal of the chair to put it to the body to decide whether it was in fact an error. So these two motions are just ways to correct any procedural error made by the dais. We also have an adjournment of debate, which is a very rarely used motion that would basically table a topic. You would move on to the second topic that you agreed upon and not vote on the first topic. Very rarely used, is just there as an option if the body did want to transition to the other topic without voting. You have that ability. Tied to that motion down below is the reconsideration motion. So if the body did move on to another topic and then decides they want to go back to the original topic, we have a motion for reconsideration that would allow that to happen. But again, these are very rarely used motions. We just have them there if the body would like to do so. There's also during voting procedure a request for a recorded vote. So this is basically a way that if your member state intends to vote no on a given draft resolution, you would raise this motion and we will simply do a digital roll call vote to take the vote manually. And we get numbers on how many for and how many against. Otherwise, all draft resolutions are considered by acclamation unless a member state raises this motion. So this is best way, if your member state is intending to vote no on a draft resolution, you would raise a request for a recorded vote so you could then vote no. The last one down at the very bottom that I didn't cover is reopening the speakers list. So again, just a way if someone closed the speakers list, but we decide we want more speakers, then you can reopen the speakers list and people can put their name on it again. So these are all of the motions. Did we get one more, Courtney?
We have a couple questions. One, I have a similar question when it comes to formatting the request of topics in formal session. Would we just say we would like to adopt the agenda in order of 1, 2 for speaking time or with a specific time, or do we actually request very specific subtopics for each topic?
So we have preset agenda topics. These are what you wrote your position papers on for your committee. So the topic number one, as it was written in your committee's background guide, and topic number two, as it was written in your committee's background guide. When you go to adopt the agenda on that first session, that is the order in which we discuss those is the only thing you are selecting. We're not voting on or selecting any specific subtopics. It is just we're going to discuss either topic one first, then topic two, or we're going to discuss topic two first and then topic one. So ordering the agenda or adoption of the agenda is just picking which of those two topics you would like to discuss for the week. Because realistically, we will only be covering one topic. If you're in a plenary size committee like a general assembly, you're probably only going to get through the one topic that you select for the week. So yeah, we don't do a motion to adopt the agenda or a certain amount of speaking time on which topic. We just, by the end of the first night, you will have selected either topic one, then topic two, or topic two, then topic one. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes. Let's see. Want to clarify, you can vote no on a resolution without requesting a recorded vote.
No. So again, this is why we have the request for the recorded vote. That is the only way that you would be able to vote no, because otherwise the resolution would be adopted by acclamation. So essentially in committee, your chair will say, we're now considering draft resolution 1-1. Are there any points or motion on this draft resolution? And if no one raises a motion, then it is assumed that all member states are in acclamation in wanting to adopt the resolution, and it will pass automatically. So if you do intend to vote no, you will have to raise your placard and request a recorded vote. Or if someone else raises the motion and they request a recorded vote, then you will then be able to vote no. But if no one raises a motion, it will be automatically assumed that all member states want to adopt the resolution. So again, if you are intending to vote no, you will need to raise your placard and raise a motion to request a recorded vote in order to do so.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. We have lots of questions coming in. Is
Let's
this
do
a
it.
good time to do all the questions?
Yeah,
Okay,
this is your motion, so let's get
cool.
these questions out of the way now.
Um, is there a specific time to ask for specific motions?
So yes, obviously, like we said, we don't even consider things like setting the speaker's time during that first session. So that would not be the time to consider a motion for changing the speaker's time. Um, the four that you see with asterisks here on this list, point of order, appeal of the chair, division of proposal, or request for a recorded vote, those are the only motions you can use during voting procedure. None of the other ones apply anymore. So you wouldn't use division of the proposal unless we're in voting procedure, and you wouldn't use a request for recorded vote. So yeah, things like a motion for closure of debate. You would only raise that if you have multiple draft resolutions on the floor and we are ready to move into voting procedure. Because if you use closure of debate before there are any draft resolutions, we essentially end all this debate on that topic without voting on anything, which would kind of defeat the purpose. So each of these motions has a specific reason and use, and you want to make sure that your fellow delegates believe it's the right time to raise that motion before you do. The only one that you can essentially raise at any time, and it's always applicable, is a motion for suspension of the meeting. We are always happy to have you break out into informal session and discuss things amongst yourselves. So that is a motion that is applicable just about any time during the conference, but the others all have a very specific purpose.
Great. Okay, we have um so in order to present a motion, does a delegation need to be in the speakers list?
Good question. So no, the speakers list is only the order of people who go to give a formal speech for 60 or 90 seconds in front of everyone. The dais will ask for motions. After hearing a certain number of formal speeches, they will allow you to raise motions to move the committee along. So they'll say, are there any points or motions on the floor at this time? And when you hear that, you will then be able to raise your placard, and you'll want to raise it nice and high so they can see it and read it, and they'll select you if they select you. And once they say, oh, delegate of Tunisia, what point or motion do you raise? Then you will be able to forward whatever motion you would like to raise at that point in time. So you don't have to be on a speakers list. They will call for motions, and all you have to do is raise your placard. And if they call on you, they call on you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. I'll answer a few of these quickly. How can we raise a motion? It is only initiated if it is it only initiated by multiple delegations or a single delegation. A motion is only from one delegation. It can be either you and your partner if you have a partner, or just, so one or both of you. Um, but again, just a single delegation has a makes a motion. The floor is technically open for motions at all times. However, dioceses will use discretion to pause intentionally to request for motions. That is a customary time where where delegates will make their motions. We encourage you to do that to ensure that we can hear all speeches and make best use of the formal debate time. Um,
One thing to add to that real
yeah.
quick, Courtney, the one that you sort of maybe don't have to have that is for a point of order. So a point of order, if you believe that an error has been made, you can raise your placard and say point of order out loud to get the diocese's attention, and they can address the issue that you believe an error has been made in. But that's really the only exception to that rule. Otherwise, the dais will give you ample opportunities to raise other motions. So we encourage you to just wait until they call for them, unless it's a point of order, in which case you can call out whatever error it is right then on the spot.
Exactly. Thank you, Eric. And then one more question before we get to a voting question, specific voting question. Do formal debates work synonymous to how a moderated caucus work?
Uh,
Would work.
so No, again, a moderated caucus, usually in other formats of rules, is debating one specific aspect of a topic or something like that. And so you have to speak on that particular thing. During our formal session, you have the floor for either 60 or 90 seconds, depending on what committee you're in. And you can use that time to speak on whatever your member state would like to speak on, whether that's your general policy standpoint, whether you're discussing the specific working group you are working with, or if it's later in the conference and there are already draft resolutions on the floor, you could speak to your working draft resolution. Um, we do not tell you what to use your formal speaking time in. That is up to your discretion as the diplomat representing your member state. So it's not quite the same as other moderated caucuses where there's a specific topical focus. Obviously, you have the broad topic that you're discussing in your committee. But other than that, how you choose to use your speaker's time is relative to what your member state thinks it needs to discuss with the whole body.
Great. Um, If a draft resolution does not pass by acclamation, can a delegate then motion for a recorded vote? If so, would this motion be raised directly after it doesn't pass?
So the only way we would know if a draft resolution did not pass would be because someone already requested a recorded vote. Again, if no one raises a motion, it automatically passes by acclamation. So the only way we would know that a draft resolution didn't pass is because somebody already raised a motion for requesting a recorded vote. And then everyone will vote digitally via the hub, and we will have a tally for you. 110 in favor and 72 against. This motion passes. So if a motion did not pass, it would be because we already had a request for a recorded vote. So no, at that point, we are not opening up to a second vote. If it doesn't pass with the first request for a recorded vote, then that draft resolution does not pass.
Great, thank you. One additional question. If we notice other delegates are breaking conduct expectation rules, how do we bring that up and with whom?
So, a couple ways you could go about this. I would encourage and empower all of you to try and have a very professional diplomatic conversation with any delegates you see breaking conduct. I'm not sure what type of conduct violation you'd be talking about here, but if you see a delegate acting undiplomatically or unprofessionally or breaking the rules in some way, I would encourage you to address that personally with the delegate and remind them that, hey, we're not supposed to be doing XYZ. Can you work with the rest of us to follow the rules? But if it's a more serious issue of conduct violation, like any form of harassment or, of course, anything that is illegal, then you should immediately notify the dais, your director and assistant director in the room, if it's an egregious breach of conduct, like any kind of harassment. But if it's a smaller thing, like just being maybe dismissive of other delegates, not being very diplomatic or professional, talking over people, that kind of thing, we would encourage you to intervene, diplomatically and say, hey, delegate, what we would appreciate it if you would be willing to let other delegations speak. We've heard what you have to say and we'd all like to contribute to the conversation. So would you please allow us to, all have a chance to speak? You all have the most power in those groups and on the floor of your committee to help regulate that type of behavior. But again, anything that breaches to a higher code of conduct violation, feel free to let your dais know, and we will help you address that situation at that point.
Great. One more question came in. Do draft resolutions need to be passed by a simple 51% majority, or is there a two-thirds majority minimum? How does this apply to the Security Council?
So, in all non-security council committees, a simple majority will pass. Now, that is a simple majority of those who voted either yes or no. Any abstentions for those who are present in committee, they can abstain from voting yes or no on a substantive draft resolution. So basically, if there were, 15 votes in favor, 14 votes against, and 10 abstentions, it would pass because that is a simple 50 plus one majority. Security Council is, of course, a little bit different. Security Council requires 9 out of the 15 members in order to pass. And there's also the veto power of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So Security Council is slightly different. They require a higher majority, and there is veto power with some members of the council. But for all other committees, yes, a simple 50 plus 1% majority will pass all draft resolutions. Okay.
Let's see. If various groups come up with more than one working paper, um, but no motion for recorded vote is moved, do they all pass by acclamation?
I'm sorry, can you read the first part again, Courtney?
Yeah, so I think it's saying if there is more than one working paper, but no motion for recorded vote is made, do they all pass by acclamation?
So, yes. And so working papers have to be accepted as draft resolutions in order to be considered when we go to voting procedure. So the dais will let you know that, formerly working paper blue is now draft resolution 1-1. So you as a committee will know how many draft resolutions you have on the floor when you go into voting procedure, and they are considered one at a time. So the dais will say, we are now considering draft resolution 1/1. Are there any points or motions? And if there are none, no request for a recorded vote, 1-1 is adopted. Then they will say, we will now consider 1-2, again, asking for motions. So you will be able to raise a motion if you want to vote no per resolution, not collectively. So yeah, it's going to be one at a time when we go into voting procedure. Okay. So in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and move forward here. We will have time at the end again for any further questions. So if you have anything, note it down and we'll circle back. But now I just want to run through again some of the details of the most common motions and events you're going to see. So again, that first night is all about adoption of the agenda. The motion to adopt the agenda in order 1-2 or 2-1 is a very simple motion, no debate necessary. Just if we get 50 plus 1% of the committee say yes, then the agenda is adopted. Two options. If it fails, you can raise another motion to adopt it in the opposite order. And if that passes, then it will be adopted. But again, there's only two options. And if both of them fail, then we've hit a point where there's only two options and both failed, so we should really work to build some consensus there. Again, if at the end of that first night you haven't come up with a solution, it will automatically be ordered in topic one, then topic two. Okay, so that will be your first night. Um, After that, we mentioned we want to give delegates the power to manage the flow of committee. So you can opt to change the speaker's time if you believe that either more time is needed for delegates to use their formal speeches or less time. This does allow for two speakers in favor and two speakers against. So those would be very short 15-second procedural speeches saying, the delegate of Bulgaria believes that more time would be beneficial to all members of the committee. Thank you. And that would be it. Again, this is one where you need to confirm with the dais beforehand before you try to raise this motion. They will say, yes, we will allow you to raise it. So we will call upon you specifically when we ask for motions next. And then you would raise your placard. Again, not something we allow on that first night because it's just setting the agenda. So there's no need to change the speaker's time. But if you believe that either more time or less time would help the committee, go speak with the dais during informal and ask them whether they will allow you to raise that motion. The preset speaker's time is 90 seconds for small committees and 60 seconds for large committees. So ample time, but as the week goes on, people may not be using all of the time they have allotted, or some people might be running out of time regularly. So you can determine whether you think people need more or less time. When we are going to go into voting procedure, again, two ways that happens. Either a motion for closure of debate. This is where we stop discussing the matter and we move directly into voting on all draft resolutions that have been accepted by the dais. This again allows for two speakers against, those short 15-second procedural speakers, where you would say the delegation of Bulgaria believes that moving directly into voting procedure would not benefit the committee at this time. And that's it. This one does require a 2/3 majority in order to pass. Obviously, we don't want to just move into voting willy-nilly, so we allow for 2/3 majority to be required in order to do so. Okay. The other way we can move into voting is by closing the speakers list, and the speakers list, when it runs out, we go directly into voting. So this motion to close the speakers list is a simple majority with no debate. Once the speakers list is closed, then it runs its course, and once we run out of speakers, we will move directly into voting, just like we would have for a closure of debate. If we choose to close the speakers list, but people change their mind and they want to reopen it again because we're not ready to go into voting procedure, that's why we have the motion to reopen the speakers list available as well. So these are the two ways that you can move your committee into voting procedure when you are ready. Okay. Going back to a common mistake that we see, again, suspension of the meeting is the most common motion you will see. This is how you go from formal session into informal session for a period of time. It's going to be every, after hearing 10 or 12 speeches formally, the dais will open up the floor for this motion. And this is mostly what you're going to see. But sometimes we do see delegates who accidentally make a motion for adjournment of the meeting. Again, this is only used once at the end of the week to finalize the session for the year. But sometimes delegates make this mistake. So we just want to make sure you know the difference. Suspension of the meeting is what you use to move into formal or informal session. only use adjournment of the meeting. At the very end of the conference, the dais will say, are there any final points or motions on the floor? And you could raise your placard and raise an adjournment of the meeting for the year. Okay, so just want to make sure it's clear that there's an understanding of the differences between these two. Uh, Real quick before I move into this, Courtney, do we have a question in the comments?
Do we suspend the debate if the agenda is set on the first day or go directly into the chosen topics?
We move directly into the chosen topic. So the best case scenario is you all choose very quickly. You build consensus about which topic you would like to discuss, and then after the first informal session, someone raises the motion to order the agenda, topic one, then topic two, and it passes, and then you move directly into debate on that topic. So you get to maximize your time. You can start finding your working group, start talking to fellow delegates on that first night. We don't suspend it. The goal is for you to get it done as soon as possible, but we do want to make sure that everyone is discussing the topic that they feel is most important. Anything
Great. That's
else?
the only question right now.
Okay, so real quick, we're going to get into a couple of the
Oh,
more complicated. Go ahead.
if it's okay, can you close the formal debate session early by two-third majority to then move into informal session?
Not sure what you mean. By that, I
So I
will
think
say,
I'll clarify that informal session and ending formal debate early is not the same thing. So in this case, if you end formal debate by the two-thirds majority, then you end debate on the topic entirely. There's no informal session that follows, right? Can maybe repeat what ending debate means?
yeah, so to clarify, and I'll scroll all the way back to this list of motions. Okay. So a suspension of the meeting, which you can see third on the list here, is how we move into that informal where you can work with your fellow delegates discussing the topics. This is how we break from speeches to move into being able to work one-on-one. These other ones, which include adjournment of the meeting or adjournment of debate, these are again, one is used to end the conference for the whole year, and then this other one, adjournment of debate, is where you would stop talking about a given topic and move on to the other topic. So these are more kind of permanent changing or ending debate on a topic. So that's the difference between a suspension of the meeting where you just pause and you will return to formal session in a period of 30 minutes or whatever you decide. These ones are the ending the session for the year because we've run out of time and the conference is ending, or again, a rare case where, a closure of debate where you want to move into voting. If you do a closure of debate, then we go into voting procedure. And after the voting procedure, then we would circle back to the next topic and just keep going like we did before. Does that answer the question to whoever raised that? Okay.
Sorry, yes, I was muted again.
So yes, yeah, suspension of the meeting is the main one you're going to be hearing. The others are very rarely used, only at the end of conference. Okay. So division of the proposal, as I brought up briefly before, is only used during voting procedure. And this is when you have a draft resolution that has content that is specifically important that the delegates who usually are sponsors of that motion would like to highlight the importance of. You can annex it to the basically top of the document by using this procedure. So it's a two-part motion. The first part is just should we consider separating out one portion of this document from the rest of it? So a procedural motion on whether we want to take out operative clause. Let's just say it's operative clauses 1 and 2. This is what we want to highlight. So the first part of this motion is just a procedural vote on whether we should consider separating out operative clauses 1 and 2 from the rest of the document. Okay, so this requires debate. Two speakers will have those 15-second speeches in favor of it, and two speakers will have 15-second speeches against it. After we've heard from those four delegations, then it goes to this first procedural vote. Now, this, if it does not pass, means we are done with the motion and we just move on with the rest of voting procedure. The body decided they don't want to split out any part of this resolution. If it does pass, then the vote passes, and we now have to consider the substantive outcome of separating out operative clauses 1 and 2. So the two clauses have been divided out, and now we have to put it to a vote of, do we create an annex for this or do we delete it from the document? These are the two outcomes of the second substantive vote. If the vote does not pass, then those clauses, operative clauses 1 and 2, are deleted entirely from the document, which goes against what the purpose of this motion is, which is to highlight. So most likely you would have a positive vote. It will pass, and therefore those two clauses will be annexed. Now, we have had delegations in the past who try to use this to delete material from a document, and that's not necessary. One, that's not what this motion is used for, but also we have an amendment process that can be done before we go into voting procedure, where if you want to make a change to a document, you can delete content using an amendment. So we just want to reinforce that this division of the proposal is used to highlight and create an annex, not used to delete content, even though that is a possible outcome. So this is probably the most complex motion we have at NMUN. So we wanted to walk you through this as it may be something that comes up. But again, we will encourage delegates to use amendments to make any changes to draft resolutions once they're formed, but also, use your time wisely in committee to create the best version of a working paper possible so that when it's accepted as a draft resolution, we don't necessarily want to make any changes to it. Okay. Any questions pop up on division of the proposal?
Yes. Is the division of the proposal only applicable to operative clauses?
That is correct. Preambular clauses are just essentially background information and documentation. So there's no substantive material in them that needs to be changed. So yes, this only applies to operative clauses. Preambulars cannot be divided out in a division of the proposal.
Great. And then the last one is about this is how would we organize the two that are in favor and two that are against?
So when this motion comes up, the dais will take the motion. Let's say that Bulgaria raised the motion for division of the proposal to divide out operative clauses 1 and 2. The dais will say that motion is in order. This allows for 2 speakers in favor, 2 speakers against. They will usually say, Bulgaria, since you raised this motion, are you willing to speak in favor? And Bulgaria will say yes. Then they will say, is there any other delegation who wishes to speak in favor of this motion? And you will raise your placard. And if selected, they'll say, okay, China, you will speak in favor. Then they'll say, are there any delegations who wish to speak against? And you'll raise your placard and they'll pick 2 delegations. So they will then create the list of 4 delegates who speak, and they will have them speak in alternating order to hear these speeches for and against. So it's basically by raise of placard, they will select the 4 member states who will be speaking in favor and against.
Great, thank you. That is it for now.
Okay, so you will hear these terms. There are substantive votes and there are procedural votes. These are the 2 types of votes that we have at NMUN. Substantive votes refer to any voting on the content being produced by the committee in draft resolutions. So that's voting during voting procedure on draft resolutions. It can also mean voting on amendments. If there's an unfriendly amendment, the body gets to vote on whether to make that change to a document. That would be a substantive vote. Division of the proposal. The second vote is also a substantive vote. So this is any vote that directly relates to the material being produced by the committee. These are usually conducted via electronic means, so we can accurately tabulate the votes. Observers or NGOs in committee, we have a few like Oxfam International, who will be joining us as NGOs in some of our plenary size committees. They are not allowed to vote on substantive votes. So that is the one caveat of representing either an NGO or an official observer like the Holy See. Substantive votes are not afforded to those members. Depending on whether you have indicated that your member state is present or present and voting, you will be able to either vote in favor, yes, or if you've opted present, you can abstain from a substantive vote, which means you don't vote yes or no, you simply walk away from this vote. So that is a substantive vote. The opposite of that is, of course, then a procedural vote, which is usually all of the motions like suspension of the meeting or anything relating to changing the speaker's time. Most of the motions you see on that list are procedural in nature. Observers and NGOs can vote on procedural matters. So whenever there's a motion for a suspension of the meeting or anything like that, observers and NGOs do vote on this. In fact, everyone has to vote on these. Abstentions are not possible for procedural votes, regardless of whether you're present or present in voting. Procedural is just the work of the committee, so everyone should be having a say in whether you want to go into a suspension or not. So all member states must partake, all member states, observers, and NGOs must partake in procedural votes. Okay, so do we have any questions regarding this?
Nope. And I'll just flag that we have 13 minutes. So
Okay.
any questions that come in, I'll try to answer them directly. And then the recording will be available within the next few days.
I'm pretty sure we're just about done with the presentation here. So I'll run through the last of this and we'll spend the last hopefully 10 minutes with any lingering questions. So these are a few of the most common mistakes we see with delegates using either motions from other rules of procedure. For instance, we'll have delegations say, I want to suspend the meeting for 30 minutes for the purpose of a moderated caucus. Again, we don't do that. So all you need to say for our purposes is motion to suspend the meeting for 20 minutes, and that is adequate. Motion for a moderated caucus. Again, we don't have that, so that's not a motion that we would recognize. Some member states will, at the end of their speech, if they don't use the whole time, will say, I yield my time to the chair. Again, in things like Robert's Rules of Order, that's necessary. We don't need that here. So if you're finished with your speech, you can simply say thank you and end your speech and go back to your seat. Um, Other thing we hear often is sort of first person language, like, I am of the opinion that XYZ should happen. You are representing a member state, so we recommend that you say instead something like, the delegation of Bulgaria believes that we should do XYZ. So, again, trying to maintain that sort of third person diplomatic tense as opposed to a personal one. These are the common things we hear delegates doing that just, are either common mistakes or are based in other forms of rules of procedure. So just to get ahead of these, again, no moderated caucuses. You simply call for a suspension of the meeting and you don't need to yield your time. The last thing that we try to have delegates not do is say, working paper blue is discussing blah, blah, blah. When you give a formal speech, we don't want to be referencing any working papers because those working papers are not available for all delegates to read and see. So when you're giving a formal speech, we request that instead you simply talk about the topics or the ideas that your working group is discussing. So you could say, Russia is currently working with delegations in the back corner to discuss education for rural children, as opposed to saying working paper blue is discussing education for rural children. Again, just because not everyone has access to the different working papers. So in your formal speeches where you are addressing the whole body, make sure you are just discussing the ideas and what member states you're working with, as opposed to a working paper. Okay. Again, if you guys want to pull it up, the NMUN Rules of Procedure, the long form version, is available on the NMUN website or via this QR code. This has the in-depth explanation of all of the motions, all of the rules that we have for NMUN. It also contains sample scripts of how the dais might handle certain situations. So that may be helpful for you to check out if you're curious about how any of these motions might go down. We already kind of went through this, so we will skip the voting procedure aspect of it in case, unless anyone has any questions, we can do that in Q&A. But otherwise, and we already went through this, are there any questions that we have added to the chat?
Um, can you use the term working paper during formal debate?
So again, we want to avoid saying working paper, certainly a specific one. And you're just saying generally the term working paper is not a problem, but you don't want to highlight a specific working paper in your speech. Instead, highlight who is working in that group and what the topics or issues they are particularly addressing are. So instead of saying, again, working paper blue is in the back corner and we're talking about education, simply say Russia, China, and the United Arab Emirates are discussing education in the back corner of the room. We want to avoid referencing the specific papers because not everyone has access to those documents yet.
Okay, that is the only question I have. We can stay on for another few more minutes to answer any questions that may come in. Um, we want, actually, there's something. what is the to go over the purpose of the division of the proposal is. Um, why is it important to annex something? What would be the purpose of doing that, kind of in the grand
Sure.
scheme
So
of that? Yeah.
again, this is emulating maybe practices at the real UN that where we have a very important either new entity being created or a new initiative, or for instance, in the GA when they create a new International Potato Day, which is a real thing, by the way, that was created by a draft resolution in the General Assembly. When they create that, they usually provide all sorts of fun information regarding what that International Observation Day is going to include, including what entities are going to operate World Potato Day and how we're going to promote the goal of it. And so, if you were to create something like that in one of your working papers, and there was a particularly important set of operative clauses that really outlined what this new International Day of Observation was going to be and how it was going to help advocate for a certain cause or whatever, you may want to highlight that if it was included in a resolution that had other stuff in it. And so, if all of the sponsors of that working paper agree that we really want to highlight the International Day of Remembrance for blah, 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 then you could annex that to the top of the document and it will be separate. So, that's really the goal. It's if there's something particularly important that is different from some of the other content in a working paper, you can annex it to highlight its importance and have it separated from the rest of the document. That's really the goal.
Yep. Okay. Said they greatly appreciate it. That is our final question. So I think we can call that
Okay.
a great session.
Yeah, thank you all for attending. Again, we will be having an in-person sort of version of this at the conference for both week A and week B. So if you are eager to see more of us and want to hear more about this, you can attend in person. But we hope that we've covered all of your questions about just generally what to expect and how to use our rules of procedure. And we love the turnout. Thank you guys for taking some time out of your Sunday evening or afternoon or morning, and we very much look forward to seeing you all in New York in just a few short weeks.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Eric. We will all see you soon.